お前たちに何ができる？口先だけの理想論者に何ができる？
Oripathy and the Infected are key components to the story of Arknights. They serve as driving forces for both Rhodes Island, Reunion, and other factions throughout the game. Each in-game country treats the infected differently, and each infected displays a different symptom for their infection status, ranging from minor crystals forming on their skin all the way to multiple personality disorder. Infection with Oripathy can be observed from the main cast of characters for Arknights, to important story NPCs and enemies, down to nameless NPCs. Oripathy can range in severity, depending on if the infected accepts treatment or not, and usually worsens over time if refused. Oripathy, in rare cases, may also boost the infected's arts aptitude, though more often than not, either does nothing or makes it worse. This video will look into a few key points surrounding Oripathy. 1. How does one get Oripathy? 2. Is there a real-world equivalent to Oripathy? 3. How do the different governments of Terra treat those who are infected? 4. How does Oripathy affect those who are infected, both operators and NPCs? And 5. Is there a cure to Oripathy? Most of the information that will be analyzed is either from operator files, character stories, voice lines, or from the story itself. There is the possibility that I may miss something, as I am only human, and a one-man team, writing, recording, and editing this. To begin, there is a commonly held belief in Terra that Oripathy is an infectious disease, being able to spread from an infected to a non-infected through the usual ways of disease transmission, that being through particles in the air, ingestion of infected bodily fluids, direct physical contact with an infected, and so on. In actuality, the transference of Oripathy from an infected to a non-infected is highly improbable. The most common way to become infected is through contact with unrefined originum shards, ingots, or particles, though there are more uncommon ways to become infected. Some examples of those who got infected through direct contact with originum are Cliffheart, Aephala, and Gavial. Cliffheart became infected when she was climbing the sacred Kierg mountain, Carlon, and was pierced by an originum stone during an unexpected landslide. Ea most likely became infected during her studies in volcanoes, which were full of originum-laden particles and veins, though the archive doesn't go into detail. Gavial became infected when saving people, notably Tomimi, from a mining area. There are outliers, however, on those who are infected, such as Rosmontis and Spectre, who are both artificially infected. Rosmontis has an infected organ attached to her brainstem in order to boost her combat ability and arts abilities, while Spectre was artificially infected by Bishop Quintus, as noted in the Undertides event. An obvious real-world equivalent to Oripathy is the different cancers that can affect humans and other living creatures, both slowly and eventually kill the host, though those who die from Oripathy have their bodies become original crystals, and therefore another vector for infection. Both can be treated through pharmaceutical remedies, though cancer in some instances can be cured, unlike Oripathy. And both can affect many different parts of the body, such as eyesight, hearing, personality, memory, ability to walk, and some mental problems. But there are differences as well. Oripathy, as previously discussed, commonly infects someone through contact with unrefined originum. Cancer, however, can be caused by a wide variety of factors, ranging from genetics to lifestyle to radiation. Socially, cancer patients are treated much better than the infected of Arknights, as there is no stigma of cancer being passed from person to person like Oripathy. Oripathy has a small chance to improve the strength and/or arts abilities of those who are infected. Cancer has never been documented to do so, to my knowledge. Cancer does provide a good analog for Oripathy in our world, though they're not similar enough to call Oripathy a different version or renamed version of cancer. Oripathy differs enough through how it infects, what parts of the host it changes or damages, and the treatment of those infected with it to be called its own disease. Remaining on the social aspect of Oripathy, the different governments and ruling bodies of the different nations of Terra all treat the infected differently, but usually in a similar overall manner. That being that the infected are second-class citizens or even considered to be less than human, as they are forced to live in slums, partake in slave labor, or are expelled from cities and settlements. Starting with the most well-known and brutal, the Empire of Ursus. They are one of, if not the worst country to reside in for the infected. The infected are placed into concentration camps and are more often than not killed when found, and are used as scapegoats for governmental and military issues. This behavior by the government has led to citizens of Ursus to act violently against the infected, often violently expelling the infected from cities and hunting them down themselves. Great Yawn segregates their infected from the general public, citing health concerns for mixing the two together, as well as forbidding the infected to come and go as they please without official permission. This behavior extends to Lungmen, with Wei Yen Wu purging the slums of Lungmen of the infected. The Victorian Empire puts on the facade of treating the infected equally and promising human rights to them, but in reality are forced into quarantine zones and into working long hours, usually 14 hours or more. This could be considered partially worse than other countries, as they are given false hope and promises to the infected, though reasonably the country that actively genocides their infected population is worse. Casimir's has its infected population either live in squalor underneath its cities, waiting to be used for labor, or to be the scapegoat for the armorless Union in their attempt to kill the directors of the Casimir's General Chamber of Commerce, who plan to genocide the infected after the assassination. Alternatively, the infected fight in the gladiatorial blood sport that is the Casimir's Major, either against gloom pincers or other infected, having the opportunity to face non-infected knights if they win the infected participation system. The Colombian Union overall appears to not discriminate as much towards the infected compared to other countries, unless you count infected migrants who come to Colombia. The migrants must earn their Colombian citizenship through labor, meaning the infected are seen as easy and cheap labor for companies such as Mama John's, who exploit them and give them false Oripathy suppressants. The Kingdom of Lithenian, before the ascension of the Twin Empresses and doubly so during the reign of the Witch King, had the infected used as experiments and lab subjects to ensure the supremacy of Lithenian arts and arts research, with the forced infection of non-infected being common when infected test subjects were running low. After the Twin Empresses usurped the throne and killed the Witch King, these practices were disregarded for their barbarity, though the infected are still forced to live in quarantine zones and be forcibly euthanized when their infection reaches a certain stage. Anyone from the Lateran city who becomes infected is banished from the city while retaining their rights as a Lateran, and in some extreme circumstances may return. Infected Monosians face no discrimination, but aren't allowed to be part of the 12 hero cult's clergy, as it's open to non-infected only. Rimbilitans infected are mainly employed in the original mines, as it's the only place that will actively hire infected, as well as those with Oripathy facing medical bills that many are unable to afford. The Sargon Empire's treatment of the infected varies from lord to lord, as some ignore the infected and let them die, while fewer still give them treatment while quarantining them from the non-infected. The tribes of Sargon are unaware of what Oripathy is, and therefore can't discriminate against them. Kyrgyz currently doesn't discriminate in any way whatsoever against the infected, but due to the rapid industrialization and commercialization of the ruling Silver Ash family, which will cause originum pollution, as well as the conservative factions like the Brown Tails and Pale Roaches being opposed to it, the fate of the infected will come into question sooner or later. The countries of Kazdel, Sami, the Kingdom of Iberia, Aegir, Bolivar, Higashi, Siesta, and Syracusa have no currently known discriminatory behaviors or attitudes towards the infected. Shown currently is a graph, albeit an outdated one, showing the BOC densities and CO assimilations for some of the operators. Though there are many on the chart, and including those who aren't on the chart, the majority don't suffer from more symptoms of Oripathy outside of the usual crystals growing on their body and the clouded dark areas and x-rays taken of them. But, as always with these sorts of diseases, there are notable outliers, both NPC and operators, who have their body and mind affected further by Oripathy. Beginning with NPCs, we have a more recent one, Crady. Though it doesn't affect him directly, actually keeping his Oripathy from developing any further, it does affect the infected around him, accelerating their Oripathy, though the infected, who are now quickly dying, believe they are recovering or feeling better in general. Again, affecting the infected around him but not himself is Mephisto. After having Originum shoved down his throat, making him an infected, Mephisto is able to heal other infected only, but is also able to control them by making them become zombie-like in nature. The control he wields over the zombie-like infected creatures causes the infected great pain. Frostnova's body temperature is linked to her Oripathian arts, as she is able to freeze mostly anything through the use of them. As seen multiple times in the story, and when the Doctor interacts with Frostnova, she's careful to make sure that no one touches her skin, as if anyone does, they will get severe frostbite. And Diciopolis the Blood Knight is able to control his blood using arts, at the cost of his Oripathy worsening and the draining of his blood from his circulatory system. With his blood, he is able to create blood blades, which he can control and use to attack others. Now for the real meat and potatoes of this video, the infected operators. The operators tend to have more documentation about their infection and how it affects both the operator's body and mind. These can range from minor symptoms and effects such as horns and tails growing to abnormal size and shape, to the ability to cause brain hemorrhaging and psychological damage with their voice. Beginning with Seabe, her Oripathy has given her the ability to quote-unquote enchant her weapons, with the enchantments choosing what weapons they prefer to reside in, ranging from really cold axes, really hot knives, or really heavy spears. Her infection gave Seabe a sort of obsessive-compulsive disorder, or just an obsession, with weapons and consuming food. Before Rhodes Island, she wandered Terra and collected weapons, sometimes through violence. Estelle's Oripathy influence is much more simple comparably, as her problem is the mutation causing her horns to multiply and grow to a large degree. These horns have caused Estelle a great deal of distress, as well as damaging the Doctor's door when greeting them. Aophala's symptoms are a sad one, and are often talked about within the Arknights community, and has led to a popular fringe theory that the enemy, Pompeii, is actually Ea after her Oripathy got the better of her. Regardless, in our archive files, it's noted that Ea uses a hearing aid, or sometimes asks the person talking to her to repeat themselves, due to the damage that her Oripathy has caused to her hearing. Though briefly touched upon in our archive files, Ea admits outright in some of her dialogue that her eyesight is going as well. Though a bit better than Ea, Ifrit still has it pretty bad with her infection. She suffers from chronic muscle pain as well as occasional hallucinations. Said chronic pain has caused her to develop anxiety from the onset of it, and because of the implanting of shards of the Diabolus Sarkaz into Ifrit, she possibly has dissociative identity disorder, with the Diabolus sometimes taking over or influencing her actions. Lapland's Oripathy gives her the rare addition of being strong from it, as she is able to harness her powerful arts and is able to find and strike at an enemy's weakness unparalleled. However, she is not without fault, as she possesses an unhealthy obsession with the operator, Texas, who actively avoids Lapland whenever possible. Lapland appears to enjoy this hard-to-get act for whatever reason. Unlike Ethan, who possesses the ability to camouflage as part of his race, Manticore develops said ability through her Oripathy. Manticore is able to transform her entire body invisible, aiding with stealth. While testing her invisibility, no Rhodes Island member was able to locate her, though some were able to defend against her stealthy attacks. Nightingale's Oripathy affects her body and mind. Her memory appears to have suffered partial amnesia, though this appears to be self-inflicted and through the application of medication or drugs. Her poor ability to walk long distances without assistance from a wheelchair or being carried are more so the fault of the Oripathy than the memory loss. Nightingale has a sort of Jekyll and Hyde situation going on due to her Oripathy-induced dissociative identity disorder. Nightmare is what the Hyde of the situation is named, and Gloria, the Jekyll, does not remember what occurs when Nightmare is in control. Nightmare comes forth and takes control from Gloria when she loses control, and Nightmare is actively trying to take over the body, being the dominant personality. Phantom's arts take the form of the original crystals embedded in his throat. He is able to alter the shadows through the sounds he produces, but in the process of doing so, interferes and damages the psyche of living beings, with more intense emotions resulting in deeper effects. This danger is suppressed with his modified infection monitor, though without it, he may cause spontaneous aneurysms or a damaged psyche. Province is a comparatively much happier note than the previous operators, as her only issue is her exceedingly large tail. The only danger that this poses for Province, outside of upkeep and knocking things over, is Project Red, who enjoys touching other Lupo's tails. Telopsis is an interesting case, as she acts either like a computer or robot, a symptom of either schizophrenia or psychosis, as well as having narcoleptic episodes where she falls asleep either unexpectedly or easily due to her oripathy. In one of her dialogue lines, she falls asleep mid-sentence, and in another, she blames her way of speaking on the originum infection, stating that she doesn't enjoy talking or acting the way she does. Scavenger, as mentioned in my operator summary video of her, has had her personality change due to her oripathy, specifically the limbic system of her brain, which controls emotion, behavior, long-term memory, and smell, making her difficult to talk to. Shamari's infection awakened her arts abilities and caused him to go out of control, with the local townspeople from her village being happy to see her leave as they saw her as a curse. These arts allow Shamari the ability to control others' consciousness. She frequently talks to her doll, Morty, and uses spells from the doll to cause harm to her enemies, possibly alluding to schizophrenia developing from the infection. Silence is similar to Telopsis in not only their species or employer, but also some of their oripathy effects, as Silence also suffers from narcolepsy. The regularity of her sleep patterns have been affected by her infection, often finding herself drowsy or sleepy. Spectre's mental health issues are some of the worst yet, being plagued by most notably amnesia, psychosis, emotional instability, and lack of self. Her overall mental stability is low. While in battle, she talks to herself and is quiet. Her interactions with other operators are limited due to her mental instability, and often gets violent when talking to the doctor. Finally, we have Rosmontis, who is a special case when it comes to the infected, as she's technically infected despite not having the usual signs of oripathy. This is because of the experiments that were conducted on Rosmontis when she was a child. A special organ was implanted and attached to her brainstem, technically making her infected, while not having the drawbacks of oripathy. This organ gives her an enhanced arts ability, further enhanced than it already was, with the consciousness of Rosmontis' brother activating the organ and still possibly existing somewhere in her brain. She appears to suffer from partial memory loss, which is self-inflicted because of her traumatic past. Finally, we have the last section, which is more fringe theory than anything else. Currently, there is no be-all, end-all cure to oripathy on Terra outside of death and then cremation. The closest thing that exists are pharmaceutical drugs and medicines, such as ones created by Rhodes Island, that slow or stabilize the oripathy of infected operators. These are applied on a regular basis, as well as both non-infected and infected operators at Rhodes Island being required to wear an infection monitor to monitor their originum levels. Where we start to get more fringe is the possibility of a cure that Rhodes Island possesses, that being the Doctor. It's noted somewhere in the story that the sarcophagus that the Doctor emerges from at the start of the story is able to heal a wounded person. However, if an infected is put inside, such as Mephisto, it transforms the infected into its ancient form, or the animal that the infected features come from, such as an Ursus turning into a bear, a Liberi turning into a bird, or a Lupo turning into a wolf. But the Doctor, either because they aren't infected or perhaps they aren't an ancient, was fully healed of their wounds from the Dark Knight's memoir events. The theory circulating about the Doctor is that the drugs and medication used to suppress, slow, or stabilize oripathy is concocted from the Doctor's blood, as the Doctor's blood possibly carries the cure for oripathy. Warfarin, a Sarkaz vampire, is not allowed to go anywhere near the Doctor's blood, for she is fatally attracted to it, possibly because of its properties. But as it stands now, these are theories at best. Thank you for watching. Please follow my Twitter for updates and check out my other Arknights and Azure Lane videos as well. The next video will cover Azure Lane's priority research or PR ships and their mental instabilities.